If you're watching Karenology, you know these stories never start simple. This one? It began with the sound of a drill at 6:30 in the morning, cutting through my sleep like a rusty blade. I stumbled to my front window and froze. Two guys in orange vests were painting over my driveway. Not just any paint job. They were covering the high-contrast yellow stripes I'd carefully installed for visually impaired pedestrians. The same stripes that had taken me 3 months of paperwork and $2,000 of my own money to get approved. "Morning, Marcus." Karen Whitman stood at the edge of my property, clipboard in hand, looking like she owned the whole neighborhood, which, in her mind, she probably did. Beige only, that's the rule. I grabbed my measuring device, an old contrast meter my father had given me when I started working as an accessibility inspector. The metal felt cold in my palm, just like the pit forming in my stomach. Those stripes are ADA compliant. They're required by federal law. Karen's smile could have frozen hell over. Not on private community property. We've changed our status to gated community. Your little art project violates our aesthetic guidelines. She slapped a yellow violation notice against my mailbox. $2,400. You have 48 hours to comply. The smell of fresh paint mixed with diesel fumes from their generator made my head spin. Have you ever felt that moment when your whole world shifts under your feet? That's exactly what happened as I watched years of careful work disappear under roller after roller of bland institution beige. "This is insane," I said, waving the contrast meter toward the crew. "These markings help blind people navigate safely. Mrs. Chen from down the street depends on them." "Mrs. Chen can use the sidewalk like everyone else." Karen's voice carried that special tone reserved for people who think they're doing you a favor by crushing your soul. "Rules are rules, Marcus. You signed the covenant when you moved in." I wanted to argue, but the workers had already covered half the stripes. My phone buzzed with a text from my bank. A hold had been placed on my savings account. Somehow, these people move fast when they wanted your money. "You can't just freeze my assets," I said, scrolling through the automated message. "We can when there's a pending violation that affects property values. It's all in Section 15.7 of the homeowner agreement." Karen tucked her clipboard under her arm like a shield. "Nothing personal, Mr. Cole, just business." The workers finished their job with the efficiency of a pit crew. 20 minutes and my carefully measured accessibility improvements looked like they'd never existed. Just uniform beige stretching from my garage to the street, as bland and useless as everything else in this neighborhood. But here's what Karen didn't know about me. I'd been installing accessibility features for 15 years. I knew every regulation, every requirement, every loophole, and more importantly, I knew the difference between what's legal and what's right. As her crew packed up their equipment, I noticed something odd. One of the workers kept glancing at me, then at Karen, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. His name tag read Miguel, and when our eyes met, he gave me the smallest nod toward their truck. After they drove away, I walked over to where they had been working. The paint was still wet, and underneath it, I could see the faint outline of my yellow stripes bleeding through. The coverage was thin, rushed, almost like they knew this job wouldn't last long. I pressed my finger against the fresh paint and felt it give slightly. This wasn't the industrial-grade coating they'd need for a permanent fix. This was theatrical paint, the kind used for temporary stage sets, the kind that would wash away with the first good rain. That's when I realized Karen had made her first mistake. She was in such a hurry to assert control that she'd cut corners on the cover-up. And if she'd cut corners here, what else had she rushed through? I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, close-ups of the thin paint coverage, wide shots of the whole driveway, detailed images of the violation notice. You never know when documentation might save your life. The afternoon brought another surprise. 3 more violation notices stuffed in my mailbox. Apparently, my garden border was too colorful, my house numbers were insufficiently coordinated, and my mailbox post needed repainting to match the community standard. Each notice came with its own fine, 500 here, 800 there. By dinner time, I was looking at over $4,000 in penalties, with daily interest accumulating like a slot machine jackpot in reverse. That night, I sat on my back porch with my father's contrast meter, turning it over in my hands. He'd used this same device to design safer building layouts for 3 decades. "Accessibility isn't charity," he used to say. "It's just good design that happens to help everyone." I thought about Mrs. Chen, who walked her little dog past my house every morning. Without those contrast stripes, she'd have no way to tell where the driveway ended and the sidewalk began. I thought about the delivery drivers who relied on clear visual markers, especially in the early morning darkness. But mostly, I thought about Karen's satisfied smile as she'd watched my work disappear under layers of beige conformity. The next morning brought a knock at my door. A young man in a county inspector's jacket stood on my porch, holding a tablet and looking slightly nervous. "Mr. Cole, I'm Ryan Mitchell from the County Accessibility Office. I got your compliance report about federal ADA requirements." He glanced around like he expected Karen to jump out from behind a bush. "Mind if we take a look at your driveway?" Ryan Mitchell couldn't have been more than 25, but he handled that thermal camera like he'd been doing accessibility inspections his whole life. The morning sun was already beating down on my freshly painted driveway when he aimed the device at the beige surface. "Interesting," he muttered, watching the digital readout. "Surface temperature's already hitting 92 degrees, and it's only 8 a.m. I stepped closer to see the camera's display. The beige paint showed up as angry red and orange blotches on the thermal screen. What does that mean for someone using a wheelchair or walking with a cane? It means by noon, this surface will be hot enough to burn skin through thin-soled shoes. Ryan lowered the camera and looked at me with something that might have been respect. Your original high-contrast stripes would have reflected most of this heat away. Basic physics. The electronic beeping of his equipment mixed with the distant sound of lawnmowers starting up around the neighborhood. I could already see curtains twitching in windows across the street. Word traveled fast in places like this. "Here's what I don't understand," Ryan continued, making notes on his tablet. "Your homeowner association filed a complaint about non-compliance, but federal ADA requirements override local aesthetic guidelines. Always have. Try telling that to Karen Whitman." "Actually, I'd like to." He pulled out a business card and handed it to me. "There's something else you should know. Your HOA board received a municipal contract for accessibility consulting 6 months ago. Guess who owns the contracting company?" I stared at the card, processing what he'd just told me. "Karen?" "Karen's company, Whitman Property Solutions. She's been billing the county for accessibility improvements while simultaneously blocking them in her own neighborhood." Ryan's tablet chimed with an incoming message. "That's what we call a conflict of interest." The pieces started clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. Karen wasn't just power hungry. She was running a scam. Bill the county for accessibility work, then prevent actual improvements so she could keep collecting consultation fees without delivering results. "Can you prove this?" I asked. "Working on it, but I need documentation of the violations she's creating." Ryan gestured toward my driveway. "This beige paint job? It's actually creating a safety hazard. If someone gets injured because they can't see the transition between your driveway and the sidewalk..." He didn't need to finish. I understood liability well enough. "What do you need from me?" "Keep documenting everything. Photos, temperature readings, any communication from the HOA board." Ryan packed his thermal camera back into its case. "And Marcus, be careful. People who run cons this sophisticated don't like being exposed." As if summoned by our conversation, Karen's white SUV pulled into the street. She parked directly across from my house and sat there for a long moment, engine running, watching us through her windshield. And Ryan noticed too. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that." Karen finally got out of her vehicle, all business suit and sharp edges in the morning heat. She approached us with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her entire life. "Mr. Mitchell, isn't it?" She extended a manicured hand toward Ryan. "Karen Whitman, HOA board president. I wasn't expecting a county inspection today." "Just following up on a compliance report," Ryan replied, keeping his voice professionally neutral. "Mr. Cole's original accessibility modifications were federally mandated." "We're being the operative term." Karen's smile could have cut glass. "We've since updated our community standards to prioritize aesthetic cohesion. Surely you understand the importance of the property values?" I watched Ryan's face carefully. He was younger than both of us, but something in his expression told me he'd dealt with people like Karen before. "Property values don't supersede federal accessibility law, Mrs. Whitman. You should know that, given your consulting work with the county." Karen's smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Ryan pulled out his tablet and showed her the thermal readings. This beige surface creates a burn hazard for pedestrians with mobility devices. That's a clear ADA violation. According to whose interpretation? According to Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 36(1)(4), which defines public accommodations to include privately owned facilities that affect commerce. Ryan's voice never changed tone, but his words hit like hammer blows. Your neighborhood sidewalks connect to city infrastructure, making them subject to federal oversight. Have you ever seen someone's entire worldview collapse in real time? Karen's face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, anger, calculation, fear, then back to that fake smile. Well, obviously we want to comply with all applicable regulations, she said, her voice tight as piano wire. Perhaps we could schedule a more formal meeting to discuss remediation options? That won't be necessary. Mr. Cole's original accessibility features need to be restored within 72 hours, or the county will issue a formal violation notice against the HOA. Karen turned to look at me directly for the first time since she'd arrived. This isn't over, Marcus. Actually, Mrs. Whitman, it is. Ryan closed his tablet with a decisive snap. Unless you'd prefer to explain to your insurance company why you're willfully creating liability hazards on community property. The color drained from Karen's face. Insurance. The magic word that makes HOA board members break out in cold sweats. After she drove away, tires squealing slightly on the hot asphalt, Ryan turned to me with something approaching a grin. That went better than expected. Think she'll actually restore the stripes? Oh, she'll do something. Question is what? Ryan headed toward his county vehicle, then paused. Marcus, I meant what I said about being careful. I've seen people like Karen before. They don't just roll over when their schemes get exposed. As his car disappeared around the corner, I noticed Miguel from yesterday's paint crew walking down the sidewalk. He moved casually, like he was just out for a stroll, but when he passed my house, he dropped something small near my mailbox. After he was out of sight, I walked over and found a folded piece of paper tucked under a rock. The handwriting was careful and neat. She's not done. Check your insurance tonight. M. The paper felt heavier than it should have in my hand. Whatever Karen was planning next, at least I wouldn't be going in blind. But as I folded Miguel's note and slipped it into my pocket, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. Miguel's warning about my insurance turned out to be dead on target. That evening, I found a certified letter from Metropolitan Home Insurance wedged in my doorframe. The official language was cold and clinical, but the message was crystal clear. My homeowner's policy was under review due to recent safety violations and non-compliance issues reported by community management. I read the letter twice, feeling my blood pressure spike with each bureaucratic phrase. They were giving me 10 days to remediate all outstanding violations, or face policy cancellation. Without insurance, my mortgage company could legally demand full payment within 30 days. Karen wasn't just playing games anymore. She was going for my throat. I called the insurance company's customer service line and spent 45 minutes on hold, listening to jazzy elevator music that made me want to throw my phone across the room. When I finally reached a human being, she sounded like she was reading from a script. Mr. Cole, we've received documentation of multiple property violations from your homeowner association. Until these issues are resolved, we can't continue coverage. What kind of documentation? Photos showing non-compliant modifications, safety hazards, and failure to maintain community standards. The representative's voice was professionally sympathetic, but utterly inflexible. Our risk assessment team has classified your property as high liability. I asked for copies of the photos they had received, but apparently that required a formal written request and a 10 business day processing period. By then, my policy would already be canceled. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, staring at my father's old contrast meter. The brass was worn smooth from decades of use, and I could still see faint scratches where he'd dropped it on a construction site in 1987. He'd told me that story 100 times, how that dropped meter had led to discovering a contractor who was cutting corners on accessibility ramps. Sometimes the mistakes show you where to look, he'd said. I picked up the device and walked back outside to my driveway. The beige paint was starting to crack already in the afternoon heat, creating tiny fissures that looked like a dried riverbed. I knelt down and scraped at one of the cracks with my fingernail. The paint flaked away easily, revealing the original yellow stripe underneath. That's when I noticed something odd. The beige paint wasn't just thin, it was the wrong type entirely. This was latex house paint, the kind you'd use for interior walls. For a driveway that needed to withstand weather, traffic, and temperature changes, you'd need specialized concrete paint or epoxy coating. Miguel and his crew had deliberately used the cheapest, most temporary solution possible. But why? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Community meeting tonight, 7 p.m., Community Center. Your violations on the agenda. KWW. Karen wanted a public showdown. Fine by me. The community center was a low brick building that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought cheerful was a dirty word. By the time I arrived at 7, the parking lot was nearly full. News traveled fast in neighborhoods like this, especially when it involved potential drama. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a long table where the HOA board sat like a tribunal. Karen occupied the center seat, flanked by 4 other board members I recognized but had never actually spoken to. She'd changed into a navy blazer that made her look like a corporate lawyer preparing for battle. About 60 neighbors filled the chairs, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. I recognized Mrs. Chen sitting in the front row, her guide dog resting quietly at her feet. She gave me a small nod when our eyes met. "Let's begin," Karen announced, calling the meeting to order with a wooden gavel that seemed unnecessarily large. "We're here tonight to address ongoing violations of community standards by one of our residents." She stood up and walked to an easel that held a poster-sized photograph of my driveway, clearly taken before the beige paint job. The yellow accessibility stripes looked garish and out of place under the harsh flash photography. "This is what happens when individual preferences override community standards," Karen continued, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "Property values in our neighborhood have remained stable because we maintain consistent aesthetic guidelines." A few people nodded in agreement. I could feel the mood of the room shifting against me. "Mr. Cole claims these modifications are required by federal law, but that's simply not accurate. Private communities have the right to establish reasonable appearance standards." "That's not true," I said, standing up from my seat in the back row. Karen's smile was razor sharp. "Mr. Cole, you'll have your chance to speak during the comment period." "Actually, Mrs. Whitman, I'd like to speak now." The voice came from the side door, where Ryan Mitchell had just entered, carrying a briefcase and wearing his official county inspector jacket. The room went dead quiet. Karen's confident expression flickered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "Mr. Mitchell, this is a private community meeting." "Yes, but you're discussing federal accessibility requirements, which fall under county oversight." Ryan walked to the front of the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "I have some information the board might find relevant." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder, thick with documents. "Mrs. Whitman, your company, Whitman Property Solutions, has received over $40,000 in county contracts for accessibility consulting over the past year. Is that correct?" Karen's face had gone very pale, but her voice remained steady. "I fail to see how my business dealings are relevant to this meeting. They're relevant because you've been billing the county for accessibility improvements while simultaneously preventing those same improvements in your own community." Ryan held up a photograph that looked identical to Karen's poster, except this one showed my driveway with the beige paint covering. "This represents a direct conflict of interest and potential fraud." The room erupted. Neighbors started talking all at once, some demanding explanations, others defending Karen. One man near the front shouted something about property taxes and government overreach. Through the chaos, I watched Karen's face. She wasn't panicking or making excuses. Instead, she was calculating, like a chess player who just lost a major piece but was already planning her next move. She raised her hand for quiet, and surprisingly, the room settled down. "Mr. Mitchell, these are serious accusations. I hope you have substantial proof to back them up." "I do." Ryan pulled out his tablet and connected it to the room's projection system. "This is a thermal image of Mr. Cole's driveway taken this morning." The screen filled with a heat map, showing dangerous red and orange zones across the beige surface. Surface temperatures reached 98 degrees at 10 a.m. By afternoon, this becomes a burn hazard for anyone with mobility devices. Mrs. Chen stood up slowly, her guide dog rising with her. I walk past Marcus's house every morning. Before he painted those yellow stripes, I fell twice trying to find the sidewalk edge. Those stripes weren't just pretty. They kept me safe. Her words hit the room like a physical force. Several neighbors looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Karen regained control quickly. Of course we want Mrs. Chen to be safe, but there are other solutions that don't compromise our community's appearance standards. Such as, Ryan asked, tactile paving stones, for instance, or raised markers that provide physical guidance without visual disruption. It was a good answer, reasonable, compassionate, and completely beside the point. But I could see some neighbors nodding in agreement. Those modifications would cost the HOA approximately $15,000 per residence, Ryan replied. Mr. Cole's painted stripes cost $200 and meet all federal requirements. Sometimes proper solutions cost more, Karen said smoothly. That's why we pay HOA dues. The room was starting to swing back in her favor. Karen had done this before, turned potential disasters into opportunities to appear reasonable and fiscally responsible. But then, Miguel appeared at the side door, still wearing his work clothes. He looked nervous but determined as he walked to the front of the room. "Excuse me," he said, his slight accent making his words careful and precise. "I painted that driveway yesterday, but I need to tell you something about the paint we used." Karen's composure finally cracked. "This is a private meeting. Security concerns require—" "He's a county witness," Ryan interrupted. "Miguel, please continue." Miguel pulled a small paint can from his work bag and set it on the table in front of the board. "Mrs. Whitman told us to use interior latex paint, cheapest kind. She said it only needed to last a few days." The room went silent again, but this time the quiet felt different, dangerous. "She knew the county inspector was coming," Miguel continued. "She wanted the paint to fail so she could blame Mr. Cole for more violations." That's when I realized Karen hadn't just made one mistake. She'd made several, and now they were all coming due at once. The silence in that community center stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Karen stared at Miguel with the kind of look that could have melted steel, but Miguel didn't back down. He reached into his work bag again and pulled out his phone. "I recorded our conversation yesterday," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "Mrs. Whitman was very specific about using temporary paint." Karen shot to her feet. "This is harassment. Miguel Rodriguez was terminated from our contractor pool this morning for unsatisfactory work performance." "Convenient timing," Ryan observed, making notes on his tablet. "Miguel, are you willing to provide that recording to the county?" "Yes, sir." The room erupted again, but this time the energy was different. Neighbors were turning to each other with confused, angry expressions. Someone in the middle row stood up and demanded to know what other corners the board had been cutting. I watched Karen's face during the chaos. She wasn't panicking. If anything, she looked more focused than before. That scared me more than her earlier confidence. "Everyone, please!" Karen's voice cut through the noise. "Let's not lose sight of the real issue here. Mr. Cole violated clearly established community standards. Whether the temporary paint solution was ideal or not doesn't change that fundamental fact." She walked over to the easel and flipped to a new poster, this one showing photos of other houses in the neighborhood, all with perfectly maintained beige and cream color schemes. "We have a responsibility to protect everyone's property values. What happens when every homeowner decides their personal preferences matter more than community standards?" It was masterful misdirection. She was making the conversation about precedent and fairness instead of fraud and safety violations. Several neighbors were nodding again. "Mrs. Whitman makes a valid point," said Gerald Hoffman, a retiree who lived 3 streets over. "If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" "It ends with people like Mrs. Chen breaking their necks on invisible driveways," I said, standing up. "Gerald, remember when your wife had hip surgery last year? Those yellow stripes helped her navigate safely with her walker." Gerald's face shifted slightly. "Well, yes, but nothing. Those stripes aren't decoration. They're safety equipment." I pulled out my father's contrast meter and held it up. "This device measures light reflection. Federal law requires a minimum 70% contrast ratio for accessibility features. Karen's beige paint measures 12%. "Mr. Cole," Karen interrupted, "complex technical specifications don't—" "12%, I repeated, louder this time. That means a blind or visually impaired person has less than a 15% chance of detecting the edge of my driveway. Would you walk across a busy street with those odds? Mrs. Chen stood up again, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I would like to say something, if I may. The room fell quiet out of respect, if nothing else. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. In that time, I've fallen 4 times trying to navigate poorly marked transitions between driveways and sidewalks. Twice required emergency room visits. Her guide dog shifted slightly, sensing the tension in her voice. Marcus's yellow stripes were the first modification that actually made my daily walks safe. She turned toward Karen, her movements precise despite her visual impairment. Mrs. Whitman, you keep talking about property values and community standards. What about community responsibility? What about basic human decency? The words hit like a physical blow. Several neighbors looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact with each other. Karen's response was swift and calculated. Mrs. Chen, everyone here respects your situation. That's exactly why we're exploring comprehensive solutions that will help you while maintaining our neighborhood's character. Comprehensive solutions that don't exist yet, Ryan interjected. Mrs. Whitman, how long do you estimate it would take to implement these tactile paving modifications you mentioned? Well, that depends on several factors. Ballpark estimate, 6 months, a year? Karen's pause was telling. These things require proper planning and community input. So Mrs. Chen should just accept the fall risk while you plan, I asked. Marcus, you're being deliberately inflammatory. Am I? Because it sounds like you're asking a 73-year-old woman with a visual impairment to risk her safety for your aesthetic preferences. The room temperature seemed to rise 10 degrees. Neighbors were choosing sides, and I could see the division forming along predictable lines. The older residents, especially those with mobility issues, were gravitating toward my position. The younger families, more concerned about property values, seemed to support Karen. But then something unexpected happened. Jennifer Martinez, a woman in her 30s with 2 small children, raised her hand. I have a question for Mrs. Whitman. If the county says these yellow stripes are required by federal law, and you've been getting paid by the county to ensure compliance, how is preventing them not fraud? Karen's composure finally showed real cracks. That's a gross oversimplification of complex contractual obligations. Is it, though? Jennifer pressed. Because it sounds like you're taking taxpayer money to prevent taxpayer safety. Ryan stepped forward. Actually, I can clarify that. Mrs. Whitman's company has been contracted to identify and remediate ADA violations throughout the county. This neighborhood was specifically included in her coverage area. So she was supposed to recommend these yellow stripes herself, Jennifer said, her voice rising with anger. That's correct. The room exploded. Neighbors were shouting questions, demands for explanations, threats to contact lawyers. Through the chaos, I saw Karen pull out her phone and type something quickly. Within minutes, 2 men in security uniforms appeared at the back of the room. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. Folks, we need to wrap this up, one of them announced. Building closes at 9 p.m. I checked my watch. It was 8:15. The meeting just started, someone protested. Building policy. Everyone needs to clear out. It was obviously orchestrated, but there wasn't much we could do about it. People started filing out, many still arguing in small groups. I noticed Karen speaking quietly with the security guards while Ryan gathered his equipment. As I headed for the exit, Mrs. Chen approached me. Marcus, thank you for standing up tonight. I'm not done yet, I told her. I know, but be careful. People like Karen Whitman don't give up easily. Outside in the parking lot, Ryan caught up with me. That went about as well as I expected. Meaning? Meaning Karen's already planning her next move. He gestured toward the building, where we could see Karen still inside, now speaking with 2 other people I didn't recognize. I'd bet money those are lawyers. So what do? Ryan handed me another business card. Call this number tomorrow morning. It's the county attorney's office. Tell them you want to file a formal complaint about fraud in the accessibility compliance program. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Karen had shown her hand tonight, but she'd also revealed how far she was willing to go to protect her scheme. My house looked different somehow when I pulled into the driveway. The beige paint seemed to glow in the darkness, like a beacon advertising my defeat. But as I got closer, I noticed something that made me smile for the first time all day. The cheap latex paint was already failing. Cracks were spreading across the surface like spider webs, and in several places, my original yellow stripes were bleeding through. Sometimes the mistakes show you where to look. Thanks, Dad. I walked to my front door, key in hand, when I noticed an envelope tucked under my doormat. No return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and 4 words. Call me tomorrow. Evidence. It wasn't signed, but somehow I knew it was from Miguel. I called Miguel's number at 7 a.m. sharp before I could lose my nerve or second guess what I was getting myself into. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting by the phone. Mr. Cole, can you meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes? The parking area by the boat launch. Miguel, what kind of evidence are we talking about? The kind that ends this whole thing, but not over the phone. Riverside Park at dawn was eerily quiet, just joggers and dog walkers going about their morning routines. Miguel was waiting by a picnic table, a manila envelope in his hands and nervous energy radiating from every muscle in his body. Before I show you this, you need to understand something, he said without preamble. I've got 3 kids and a mortgage. If this gets traced back to me, it won't, I promise. He studied my face for a long moment, then opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of invoices, work orders, and what looked like bank statements. Karen's been running this scam for 2 years, Miguel explained. My crew gets hired to do accessibility improvements all over the county, but half the time, we're actually removing or covering up existing features. I studied the documents, my anger building with each page. Work orders for aesthetic compliance modifications that were clearly designed to create ADA violations. Invoices billing the county for accessibility consulting while simultaneously charging homeowners for removing accessibility features. This is insane. How did she think she'd get away with it? Because it's brilliant in a twisted way. Miguel pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of another neighborhood where his crew had worked. She creates violations, then bills the county to fix them. Meanwhile, she charges HOAs to maintain community standards that require removing the fixes. Double billing. Triple sometimes. She's also getting kickbacks from the paint supplier for using substandard materials that fail quickly, requiring more frequent maintenance contracts. The scope of Karen's fraud was staggering. According to Miguel's documentation, she'd manipulated dozens of communities across 3 counties, bilking taxpayers and homeowners simultaneously while putting vulnerable residents at risk. Why are you showing me this? Why not take it straight to the police? Miguel's expression darkened. Because Karen's not working alone. Look at this. He showed me a bank statement with regular deposits from something called Municipal Compliance Associates. The amounts were substantial, thousands of dollars every month. That's a shell company owned by Councilman Bradley Stevens. He's the one who approves county accessibility contracts. My blood ran cold. Stevens was a fixture in local politics, known for his fiscal responsibility campaigns, and his opposition to wasteful government spending on things like accessibility improvements. So he helps Karen get the contracts, and she kicks back a percentage. Exactly, and Stevens sits on the county planning board that oversees HOA regulations. The corruption ran deeper than I'd imagined. No wonder Karen had been so confident at the meeting last night. She had protection at the highest levels of local government. Miguel, this is evidence of a major conspiracy. You need to take this to the FBI, not me. I tried. Filed a report 3 weeks ago. He pulled out another document, an FBI case reference number. Agents said they'd investigate, but these things take time. Meanwhile, Karen's destroying evidence and threatening witnesses. Is that why you were fired? That's why my work truck was vandalized and my youngest daughter got followed home from school. Miguel's hands were shaking slightly. Karen doesn't just play hardball, she plays for keeps. The morning joggers seemed suddenly less innocent, and I found myself scanning the parking area for anyone who might be watching us. Had I been naive to think this was just about paint and property values? What do you need from me? Karen's getting desperate. Last night's meeting didn't go the way she planned, and now she knows the county inspector is suspicious. Miguel gathered up the documents. She's going to make a big move soon, something to discredit you permanently, or make this whole thing go away. Like what? I don't know, but she's called an emergency board meeting for tonight. And she's hired private security to protect community assets. That sent a chill down my spine. Private security meant Karen was escalating beyond legal harassment into something that could turn dangerous. Miguel, you should get your family out of town until this gets resolved. Already packed. We're driving to my sister's place in Denver after I give you this. He handed me the envelope. But Marcus, you need to understand. If Karen goes down, she's taking everyone with her. Stevens, the other board members, probably half the county planning department. So they'll do anything to prevent that from happening. Anything. After Miguel drove away, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the envelope full of evidence. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the FBI field office and dump the whole mess in their lap. Let the professionals handle it. But I thought about Mrs. Chen, struggling to navigate safely through a neighborhood designed to exclude her. I thought about other communities where Karen was running the same scam, putting vulnerable people at risk for profit. And I thought about my father, who'd spent his career fighting for basic human dignity through good design. I drove home and called Ryan Mitchell. Marcus, I was just about to call you. We've got problems. What kind of problems? The kind where your insurance company called the county this morning, asking for verification of safety violations on your property. Someone's been feeding them information. My stomach dropped. Karen? Almost certainly. But here's the thing. The information they received is completely fabricated. Photos showing hazards that don't exist. Engineering reports that were never conducted. Witness statements from people who don't live in your neighborhood. Can you prove the information is fake? I can prove some of it, but Marcus, insurance fraud is a federal crime. If they can make a case that you've been filing false claims or providing misleading information, he didn't need to finish. I could end up facing criminal charges while Karen walked away clean. Ryan, I need to show you something. Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the county building in an hour? Already on my way. As I drove toward downtown, my phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Janet Patterson from Metropolitan Home Insurance. I'm calling to inform you that your policy has been canceled effective immediately due to fraudulent safety violations. Those violations are fabricated. Sir, we have substantial documentation of ongoing hazards and non-compliance issues. Our investigation shows a pattern of deceptive practices regarding your property modifications. What investigation? I was never contacted by any investigator. Our contractors conducted a comprehensive site assessment yesterday evening. The findings were conclusive. Yesterday evening, while I was at the community meeting, Karen's people had been at my house, manufacturing evidence. I want copies of all documentation used in this decision. That request needs to be submitted in writing and will require 10 business days to process. The same runaround I'd gotten before. By the time I received any documentation, my mortgage company would have already started foreclosure proceedings. Ms. Patterson, I'm going to ask you one direct question. Who provided the documentation you're using to justify this cancellation? A long pause. I'm not authorized to disclose our investigative sources, but I could hear it in her voice. Someone had convinced Metropolitan Home Insurance that I was a liability risk worth dropping, and they'd done it with fabricated evidence and forged reports. After I hung up, I pulled over and called my mortgage company. The conversation was brief and devastating. Without homeowners insurance, my loan was technically in default. They were required by federal regulations to begin foreclosure proceedings within 30 days. Karen wasn't just trying to discredit me anymore. She was trying to destroy my life. But as I sat there on the side of the road, holding Miguel's envelope full of evidence, I realized something important. Karen had made a crucial mistake. She'd escalated so quickly and so aggressively that she'd left a trail anyone could follow. The fake insurance investigation, the manufactured evidence, the pressure on witnesses, it all pointed back to her. And more importantly, it showed she was afraid, really afraid. People who are confident in their position don't burn everything down to win a fight. They only do that when they're cornered and desperate. Karen Whitman was about to learn what desperate looked like from the other side. Ryan Mitchell's face went pale as he read through Miguel's documents in his county office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while I watched him connect the dots between Karen's scam and the broader corruption network. Jesus, Marcus, this isn't just fraud, it's racketeering. He looked up from the bank statements. Stevens has been taking kickbacks for 2 years while voting on accessibility funding. That's federal corruption charges. Can you do anything with this? I can, but not through normal channels. If Stevens is involved, half the county administration might be compromised. Ryan pulled out his personal phone instead of his office line. I'm calling someone I trust at the state attorney general's office. While he made the call, I stared out his window at the courthouse across the street. Somewhere in that building, Councilman Stevens probably had an office where he made decisions about public safety while taking money to undermine those same protections. Good news and bad news, Ryan said after hanging up. The good news is the state wants this case. They've been looking for a way to investigate Stevens for months. And the bad news? They need you to stay and play. Keep acting like you don't know about the bigger conspiracy while they build their case. For how long? Could be weeks, maybe months. I thought about my canceled insurance, my threatened mortgage, and the private security Karen had hired. Ryan, I don't think I have weeks. She's trying to destroy me right now. That's why we need to flip the script. Ryan leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. What if instead of waiting for her next move, we force her to make a mistake? What kind of mistake? The kind where she incriminates herself in front of witnesses she can't threaten or buy off. 20 minutes later, we had a plan. It was risky, probably illegal, and definitely crazy. But it was also the only way to end Karen's scheme before she finished destroying my life. That afternoon, I drove to the county assessor's office and requested a formal property evaluation. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, explained that evaluations typically took 2 weeks to schedule. I understand, I said, pulling out my checkbook, but I'm willing to pay the emergency assessment fee for same-day service. Sandra's eyes widened slightly. Emergency assessments cost $800 and were usually reserved for inheritance disputes or divorce proceedings. Any particular reason for the rush, Mr. Cole? My insurance company is claiming my property has safety violations that affect its value. I need an independent assessment to prove them wrong. That'll require a full ADA compliance review as part of the evaluation. Perfect. That's exactly what I need. What Sandra didn't know was that emergency property assessments were public record, available immediately upon completion, and county assessors were required by law to notify all relevant parties when evaluations were conducted, including HOA boards. Karen would know about the assessment within hours of its completion, and she'd know that an independent evaluation would expose all her fabricated violations. The assessor, a methodical man named Bob Kruger, arrived at my house at 4 p.m. with a clipboard, a camera, and the same type of thermal imaging equipment Ryan had used. He spent 90 minutes documenting every inch of my property. Interesting situation here, Bob said, studying the cracking beige paint on my driveway. This coating is completely inappropriate for exterior concrete surfaces. It's actually creating slip hazards. How so? See these cracks? When it rains, water seeps underneath and creates unstable patches. Someone could easily lose their footing. He made notes on his clipboard. The original high-contrast striping would have been much safer. Is there any legitimate reason to use this type of paint on a driveway? Bob looked at me with the expression of someone who'd seen every type of property scam imaginable, only if you wanted it to fail quickly and create liability issues. By 6 p.m., Bob had completed his assessment and filed his report with the county. My property was in full compliance with all accessibility requirements. The beige paint represented a safety hazard that reduced property value, and there were no legitimate grounds for insurance cancellation. Karen's fabricated violations had just been officially debunked by an independent county assessor. Now came the hard part. I called Karen's office and left a message with her secretary. Please tell Mrs. Whitman that I've obtained an independent property assessment that contradicts her insurance claims. I'd like to meet tonight to discuss a resolution before this matter goes to court. Then I waited. Karen called back within 20 minutes, her voice tight with controlled anger. Marcus, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to save both of us a lot of legal trouble. The county assessment shows that your insurance claims are false. That's fraud, Karen. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you do, but I'm willing to let it slide if we can work out a reasonable compromise. A long pause. What kind of compromise? Meet me tonight at the community center, 8 p.m., just you and me, no lawyers, no security. We'll hash this out like neighbors. Why should I trust you? Because the alternative is me taking this assessment to the FBI, along with everything else I've discovered about your consulting business. Another pause, longer this time. 8 p.m., but Marcus, if you're wearing a wire or recording this conversation, no wires, no recordings, just two people trying to solve a problem. After I hung up, I called Ryan. She took the bait. You sure about this? If she brings those security guys, she won't. Too public, and she needs to find out what I actually know before she decides whether to cut a deal or escalate further. And if she chooses escalation, then we'll have her confession on record. Because despite what I'd told Karen, the community center was equipped with a security system that recorded all meetings in the main conference room. Ryan had confirmed that the recordings were automatically uploaded to a county server as public record. Karen would be confessing to fraud on a system she couldn't control or erase. At 7:50 p.m., I sat in the community center parking lot, watching Karen's white SUV pull up under the streetlights. She got out alone, just as promised, but I noticed she kept looking around like she expected someone else to appear. Inside the conference room, Karen looked smaller somehow, without her usual entourage of board members and supporters. She sat across from me at the long table, her hands folded in front of her like a poker player protecting her cards. So Marcus, what's this really about? I pulled out Bob Kruger's assessment report and slid it across the table. It's about you falsifying safety violations to manipulate insurance companies. Karen glanced at the report without reading it. Property assessments are subjective. Different inspectors reach different conclusions. Not when the violations are completely fabricated. Bob found no legitimate safety issues with my accessibility modifications. None. Bob Kruger is known for sloppy work. Karen, stop. I know about municipal compliance associates. I know about Stevens. I know about the double billing scheme. For the first time since I'd known her, Karen Whitman looked genuinely surprised. Not angry, not calculating. Surprised. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sure you do. 2 years of billing the county for accessibility improvements while simultaneously removing those same improvements and charging HOAs for the privilege. Karen's surprise was already morphing back into cold calculation. That's an interesting theory. Can you prove any of it? I don't have to prove it. I just have to report it and let the investigators sort out the details. She leaned back in her chair, studying my face. You know, Marcus, I initially thought you were just another stubborn homeowner who didn't understand how communities work. But you're actually much more dangerous than that. Dangerous how? You're one of those people who thinks the rules don't apply when you decide something is unfair. That makes you unpredictable. The rules don't apply when they are being used to commit fraud. Karen smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuine. Fraud is such an ugly word. I prefer creative compliance management. And there it was. Not a full confession, but close enough to establish intent. The recording system would capture everything. So you admit to manipulating compliance requirements. I admit to finding efficient solutions to complex regulatory challenges. If some property owners benefit from streamlined aesthetic standards while the county receives comprehensive accessibility consulting, where's the harm? The harm is that people like Mrs. Chen get hurt when you remove safety features. Mrs. Chen is one person. I'm protecting property values for hundreds of families. By defrauding taxpayers and endangering disabled residents. Karen's expression hardened. By maintaining community standards and ensuring regulatory compliance. 2 completely legal activities. She was good, keeping her language just vague enough to avoid obvious criminal liability while still explaining her position. But she was also getting angry, and angry people make mistakes. What about the fake insurance investigation? I pressed. I have no knowledge of any insurance investigation. Your contractors were at my house yesterday evening, manufacturing evidence while I was at the community meeting. Marcus, you're becoming paranoid. Maybe the stress of non-compliance is affecting your judgment. That's when I realized Karen didn't just think she was smarter than everyone else. She actually believed her own justifications. In her mind, she wasn't committing fraud. She was providing services and managing problems, which made her far more dangerous than a simple criminal. Karen, last chance. Restore my insurance, remove the fake violations, and walk away from this neighborhood. Everyone goes home happy. Or what? I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. Or this recording goes to the state attorney general first thing Monday morning. Karen's face went dead white. You said no recordings. I said I wouldn't record it. I never said the building wouldn't. For a moment, just a moment, I saw real fear in Karen Whitman's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by something much colder. You have no idea what you've just done. Karen's threat hung in the air between us, like smoke from a house fire. But as I looked at her sitting there in that conference room, trying to intimidate me with vague warnings, I realized something important had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. Actually, Karen, I know exactly what I've done. I've given you a choice. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. You can cooperate with the investigation that's already underway, or you can dig yourself deeper into federal charges. What investigation? I turned back to face her, and for the first time in this whole mess, I felt completely calm. The one that started 3 weeks ago when Miguel Rodriguez filed an FBI complaint. The one the state attorney general has been building ever since. Karen's carefully maintained composure finally cracked completely. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Because it seems like there's a lot you don't know about your own operation. I sat back down across from her. Like the fact that Stevens has been keeping records of every kickback payment, or that your shell company's bank accounts are already under federal monitoring. I was bluffing about some of the details, but Karen's reaction told me I was close enough to the truth to shake her confidence. You're lying. Am I? Then why don't you call Stevens right now and ask him? Karen pulled out her phone with hands that trembled slightly. She dialed a number and waited and waited. After 30 seconds, she hung up. Voicemail, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. Funny thing about criminals, Karen, they tend to abandon ship when the water gets choppy. That's when I heard car doors slamming in the parking lot. Through the window, I could see 2 sedans with government plates and several people in suits walking toward the building. Karen saw them too. You set me up. No, Karen, you set yourself up. I just gave you enough rope. The conference room door opened, and Ryan Mitchell entered with 3 people I didn't recognize. 2 men and a woman, all wearing the kind of serious expressions that come with federal badges. Mrs. Whitman, the woman said, I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about your consulting contracts with the county. Karen looked at me one last time, and I saw something I'd never expected to see in her eyes. Defeat. I want a lawyer. That's your right. But Mrs. Whitman, we should inform you that Councilman Stevens was arrested 2 hours ago on federal corruption charges. He's been very cooperative about the details of your business relationship. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Karen sat frozen, staring at the table like it might provide some escape route from the reality closing in around her. Mr. Cole, Agent Chen continued, thank you for your cooperation. We have everything we need from the recording system. As they led Karen out in handcuffs, she stopped next to my chair. This won't end here, Marcus. There are other people involved, people who won't be as forgiving as I was. Karen, I said quietly, there's something I should probably mention. My father didn't just give me this contrast meter. He also taught me that when you're fighting for something right, you don't stop until the job is finished. She stared at me for a moment, then laughed. Actually laughed. You think this is finished? I think you're going to federal prison for a very long time. And I think everyone you've been working with is about to discover that loyalty doesn't mean much when the FBI starts offering plea deals. After they drove away with Karen, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, holding my father's old measuring device. The brass felt warm in my hands, worn smooth by decades of use in the service of making buildings safer for everyone. Ryan came back in with a cup of coffee and a tired smile. How does it feel to take down a federal conspiracy? Like I need to repaint my driveway. He laughed. The county will cover that cost, part of the restitution process. And my insurance? Already reinstated. Turns out Metropolitan Home Insurance is very cooperative when the FBI explains how they were manipulated by fraudulent evidence. 3 months later, I stood in my driveway watching a crew restore the high-contrast yellow stripes that had started this whole mess. But these weren't just painted lines. They were part of a comprehensive accessibility upgrade funded by the settlement money recovered from Karen's various schemes. Mrs. Chen walked by with her guide dog, as she had every morning for the past 8 years. But now she moved with confidence, following a continuous pathway of tactile markers and visual contrasts that connected her house to the bus stop, the grocery store, and the library. "Morning, Marcus," she called out. "Beautiful work." "Morning, Mrs. Chen. How does it feel?" Like I can finally walk through my own neighborhood without fear. The crew foreman, a young man who reminded me a bit of Miguel, came over with a clipboard. "Mr. Cole, we're finished here. Want to take a look?" I pulled out my father's contrast meter and took a reading on the new stripes. 85% light reflection, well above federal requirements. "Perfect," I said. Karen Whitman was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Councilman Stevens got 4 years and agreed to testify against 12 other officials involved in the corruption network. Miguel Rodriguez received a commendation from the FBI and a new job with the county inspector's office. The homeowners association dissolved entirely, replaced by a neighborhood council that focused on actual community improvement rather than aesthetic control. Property values, ironically, went up after the accessibility improvements were completed. And me? I kept doing accessibility inspections, but with a new understanding of how much difference one person can make when they refuse to accept that this is just how things work. Sometimes people ask me if I regret getting involved, if I wish I'd just painted over those yellow stripes and avoided all the trouble. The answer is always the same. I think about Mrs. Chen walking confidently to catch her morning bus. I think about the dozens of other communities where Karen's schemes were shut down and real accessibility improvements were installed. I think about my father, who taught me that good design isn't just about following rules. It's about remembering that those rules exist to protect real people living real lives. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between taking the easy path and doing what's right? It's not always clear which choice you're making at the time, but looking back, sitting on my front porch and watching neighbors of all abilities navigate safely through streets designed with everyone in mind, I know I made the right call. The measuring device sits on my kitchen counter now, next to my coffee maker and car keys. Still brass, still worn smooth, still ready for the next time someone needs to verify that the rules actually mean something. Because there's always a next time, and there's always someone willing to fight for what's right, even when, especially when, it's not easy. If this story resonates with you, maybe you've got your own measuring device to pick up, your own yellow stripes to defend, your own Karen Whitman to stand up to. Trust me on this one, it's worth the fight.